This is the longer version of a short talk. So if you just want the 30-second version, go look at the short clip. And really, this is about not necessarily solving a problem or teaching you how to implement something, but it's really about understanding why organizations or groups or people make changes the way they do, why they implement something the way they do, or why they take an approach, right? So a big one is sometimes we just need to make it change, right? And the macro problem for that could be that the org's not responsive to its needs. It's not, the business has changed. Customers are complaining. The current behavior could cost too much. A lot of times it's not that you're doing something high cost, but that extra pieces have been attached over time as needed and they were never cleaned up, and it's never worth the business risk to make those changes. And so you kind of bleed a bunch of money, right? Another option is something is broken, right? Those are kind of the macro reasons that we need to make change. And a lot of times it's when there's new management or reorganizations that we do that. And what are the impediments to making those kind of make it change? One of them is inertia. Just like people only like change when they are the ones responsible for it, right? Passive resistance, you see this a lot. Man, we're going to be here longer than this guy. We're just going to sit this out, right? She is never going to make this thing happen before she gets promoted or something else, right? So that's passive resistance. And the question is, how do we overwhelm passive resistance? How do we force something to happen? We have active resistance, which is at least a little more obvious and sometimes can be worked with because you can convert active resistors into supporters, but converting passive resistors tends to be more difficult because they don't always come out and tell you what their problems are. Other impediments are we don't have the skills to make those changes, so we may need to reskill, and also staff and customers or other people may not actually trust that you're have their best interest at heart, let alone the customers or the company's interest at heart. So the primary methods that we can do that, I would argue, are behavior changes and tech process or partner changes. The important part for this talk is really about partner changes. So behavior changes, layoffs are a behavior change, right? Hey, we have passive resistance and inertia. We're just going to fire all those guys, even though we're going to hire the same number of people, but with a different skill set. But the reality is, well, guess what? There aren't those people with that other skill set. We just did this to break up the embedded power structures, right? You can go for train, retrain. Organizations really seem to stay away from this. It's really hard to get right and to get everybody to buy in. I was in a group where we went to try and use SAFe, whether you like it or not. It's a quasi-agile method for strategic planning. I actually found it super interesting. There were a bunch of pieces in it that were great. May not be agile, but it was a way for us to be organized. But people got trained on it and then they passively resisted it. And we went through a bunch of training, but not everybody went through it, right? And slowly that ran aground because there was no forcing function. So a way to drive behavior changes is to create some kind of forcing function, right? Forced reprioritization. That runs into a lot of passive and active resistance. We're going to change the order of priorities in the organization, and people will come up with all kinds of reasons that they can't. So sometimes you can actually create technical change that with no off-ramp, right? The problem with a lot of ways when you want to make changes, you leave an off-ramp. Well, you got this priority and we're going to let you drag it out because you got other things that we've committed to, and that's true. But then it turns out that just never happens, right? I see a company where we claimed, the president claimed has annual goals and they claimed annual success. And I was in a meeting where we were like, how are we going to tell the CEO that this priority from 2 years ago has never been finished because the long tail on this was a problem? And everybody that worked directly with the CEO was like, man, I don't want to tell him because he already declared on stage that we had victory on this thing, right? So the question is, can we create a forcing function to make stuff happen in a timeline and cause people to stick with it, knowing that they work to the pay plan, right? So I've seen this a couple of times. Primarily, we're going to close the data center. We are going to get out of the cloud. We are going to turn off a contract. So you have to come up with another way to make this happen. We got audited in a regulatory environment, did this in a bank one time. And so we need to make enough changes and implement something in a way that this external third party. So I've seen this, hey, we're not going to renew a contract. The new thing we're going to replace it with could be used the same way as the existing one, but instead we're going to block the on-ramp until you do it the right way. So, hey, we're going to go in the cloud, but we're not going to let you take your legacy until we're like at the very end. And so we're going to force you to change the behavior into that. And we're going to close the data center on this date. And so you need to pick a priority list. Like I said, I've seen this in vendor products. I've seen it in CRM systems, other places where we try and create a no on-ramp, no off-ramp forcing function. And when we on-ramp people into the new system or the new process, we don't let them bring all their behavior with them. So I talked a little bit about this in some other at the level. There was a Crucible series I did, Reforming with Heat. That's sort of the CIO, CTO, VP, reforming an organization by forcing change, reorganization. That tends to be the layoff, closing buildings, those kinds of things. And reorganization with new people to break embedded power structures. We had strategic ignorance, which is the notion that you get hired in and you just question everything because you assume that it's busted, or that people should at least have to rethink how they did it. That can be really profitable or tiring. And then we had Enter the Dojo, which is the team where we try and change a group's behavior by increasing the tempo and the pressure on them to make it where their existing behavior doesn't work. So that's it, 6-minute version of the 1-minute talk. The question is, can you find a forcing function and stick with it? And that will make people have to change with no off ramp. Otherwise, it can be super problematic. And that's it. Have a great day.